I think that's the coolest introduction I ever had at a conference. I almost feel like a rock star with that introduction. This is the panel on customer empowerment and data management. We're going to go a little bit into the more specifics on both of these issues. And I have a panel here with both TSOs represented, the DSOs, and also the new market players. The TSOs, I think, outnumber the rest, but I think we will still have an interesting discussion. I'm quite sure that everyone will get their say. And we'll also have a couple of our TSO representatives with operative data hub experience, which I'm very glad to have. I would like to start with asking each of the panelists about their sort of general views and an overview of where they see the landscape is headed with regard to data management and customer empowerment, and also the implications for the different stakeholders, both TSOs, DSOs, suppliers, aggregators, technology providers. So if the technology is with us, I would like to give the word first to Kaja from Elring.
Thank you. So could I have the slides? I have 2 slides, and then I'm going to show you a video of an animation of Estfeed that might explain it a bit better. Great. So this is a very simple picture of how Estfeed works. There are sensors, there are smart meters. This data goes to data hubs, for example, Elring, electricity gas data hub, but it can be also weather data, it can be whatever other data, at the moment related with energy, of course. Then this data goes to Estfeed, and from Estfeed it is available for the end consumer to see the data and also to manage access rights of this data. So the main idea of Estfeed is to connect data sources and applications and provide this access management, data access management for the end consumer, so that the end consumer really has the control over who sees data and who accesses the data. At the moment, Estfeed provides 12 services for applications. These are related with the data hubs that are connected and the data sources that are connected with the platform. And yes, these services are related with the data history, with publishing the real-time data, or with requesting data, for example. And of course, one additional main point of Estfeed is to promote different energy efficiency applications that are provided on the sector. This is a bit more complicated picture of Estfeed that again shows how it starts from the smart meters, sensors, how this data goes to different data hubs, how this data from the data hubs is linked with Estfeed, and then Estfeed is linked with these applications, different applications provided on the market. And e-Elring is the place.
Right, anyway.
Is the place where you can have access to the data and also share the rights. And now please run the video. Hope you enjoy it.
Technology is developing incredibly fast. Innovative energy and information technologies, remote-controlled devices, sensors, and the Internet of Things. All of these collect and save loads of data that can be processed into valuable information, allowing more efficient and sustainable monitoring and management of consumption in homes, offices, and industry. In an ideal world, communication and collaboration between systems, data exchange, would be smooth and simple. However, that is not yet the case. How can we ensure that smart devices and quantities of data actually benefit the consumer? Estfeed is here to help. Estfeed is a data exchange platform created by the Estonian electricity, gas, and smart grid system operator Elering. Estfeed brings together three elements: data sources, applications, and consumers. Estfeed enables developers of applications and providers of energy services to gain secured and controlled access to electricity and gas consumption data, as well as to other relevant information such as weather predictions and the cost of electricity, all in a single platform. In the future, Estfeed will also share data on district heating. Additionally, Estfeed provides a development and testing environment for creating new applications. The transmission and exchange of data is completely secured within Estfeed. Security is guaranteed by the National Data Exchange Layer X-Road, upon which banking and the public sector relies in Estonia as well as in Finland. On a European level, Estfeed offers an opportunity to combine retail markets and provide cross-border energy services. Data hubs of energy consumption exists in a number of countries, but until now, there has not been a way to easily and securely exchange data and access different data hubs, which is made possible by Estfeed. Connecting the data hubs of other countries into Estfeed will enable the provision of energy services across borders. With Estfeed, you can access all data from one platform in an easy, compact, and affordable manner, because a lot of the hard development work has already been done for you. The customer portal, e-Elering, is the user interface of Estfeed. Consumers can log in to view information about their energy consumption and contracts, and authorize other private persons and providers of energy services to view and use their data. The owner of the data, or the final consumer, always has control over the use of their data. Additionally, the customer portal gives access to smart grid applications and services developed by Elering and third parties, enabling customers and clients to manage their consumption and production in an easy and convenient way. In return, e-Elering Application Store works as an excellent marketing channel for the application providers. In the end, this benefits the developers as well as the final consumers. Join and use Estfeed to improve your business.
Yes. And with that little commercial, I think I'll hand the word over to Frauke, who represents the non-TSO DSO group here today, which is rather large, of course. But to give your initial views on data management, where it's headed, and where you see the role of both the customer and new stakeholders in this sector.
Okay, thank you very much. And indeed, yes, I think I'm the only non-system operator on the panel, and would like to start actually with some examples, because what we're seeing with customer engagement today already is quite broad, whether it is ArcelorMittal or the University of East Anglia, or indeed domestic customers in France or in Switzerland who sell their flexibility to system operators, like those sitting around the small tables here. Whether it's customers here in Estonia receiving real-time price information and adjusting their consumption to market signals, or whether it's new concepts such as, for instance, blockchain-enabled community trading of self-generated solar flexibility, what have you. And this is only the beginning. And I think we can easily imagine a world in which every asset, every device, essentially, is going to be sensor-equipped and interacting with other devices. But the question is, how do we make this work, and how do we make this come together into a smart energy system efficiently? And I think the short answer is enable innovative solutions, enable new approaches, enable new business models, which is by far not obvious in such a heavily regulated system as energy is, and in many ways has to be. But then coming specifically to the question of data, and what do we need as market service providers offering these solutions that I mentioned earlier on. There are some very concrete information needs that service providers and consumers themselves need to engage. Of course, it means access to data in the first place, access to real-time information about their consumption in order to adjust, but also other data, such as, well, settlement data information, obviously, historical information to identify themes and profiles, as well as certain what we call standing data in terms of, well, which category does the consumer fall into, what are the regulatory conditions to it. And in that respect, clearly a data hub is one interesting approach to provide this. It could equally done in a decentralized approach. We are quite agnostic to that. For us, it's just important that the data is provided in a non-discriminatory manner to all service providers and not just to particular ones, but to those the consumer chooses to work with and the consumer says should have access in order to use the data that they need to provide the service. And then clearly, whoever is the data platform, the operator needs to be unquestionably neutral in pursuing this activity. But I think what's just as important as having the direct data for the consumer is also to have information on what it is that the system actually needs, and to be able to deliver in an open and transparent manner to the needs of the system. What do I mean with that? Basically, we often hear discussions about, do we need a TSO-centered approach? Do we need a DSO-centered approach? It's neither of that. What we need is an integrated approach in which TSOs and DSOs, alongside market actors, identify and make transparent which system services they require so that the market can deliver to these needs. So essentially, a market-based approach, everybody procures the flexibility they need. And of course, this procurement process needs to be streamlined in some way so that as a consumer or as a flexibility provider, I can choose at every moment that right now, it's the TSO that needs me most, I offer there. Right now, it's the DSO that has an issue and I offer there. Or maybe a balanced responsible party is off balance and offers me a better price and I go there because apparently the TSO and the DSO don't need me badly enough at this moment. And this needs to be possible. So we need an integrated perspective, transparent information of what is needed in the system, and an open market-based approach for service providers to deliver the services that are needed.
Great. And just for the record also, I'm not a system operator either, so you're not completely alone on the panel. Then I will leave the word to the one TSO here who doesn't have a data hub, as far as I understand it. Thomas.
So, hello to everybody. It is true, and I agree with you, that we always shape the debate about big questions about data hubs, TSO versus DSO, dynamic tariffs versus third-party aggregators. But what matters to the consumer maybe is something very different. I think consumers want to make the most of their flexibility regardless it is used by TSO, DSO, suppliers, anybody else. I think they also want to get access to relevant data regardless it is provided by TSO, DSOs, or suppliers. And sometimes we lose this perspective. I think it could be a problem. Maybe to be very concrete and give some examples, in France we implemented over the last years a market reform in order to promote demand response and flexibility. And just two figures. Currently, 1/3 of our contracted manual reserves is made of distributed flexibilities. 1/3. Currently, 50%, half of our rapid reserve is made of demand response. So it is not just the future. We'd not say it's the past. I'm just going to say it's the present. It is happening. That does not mean that we should not go beyond that current state, but that means that we have some stuff to build upon. And when we made some studies, we continue to believe that part of the value is going to lie in services to the grid, services to flexibility or capacity. And I think what we should do is try to find a way to ensure that this value is efficiently collected and used by the system. And data hubs, market design, it's going to be a tool to ensure and to reach this goal.
Excellent. Anders, you represent a TSO who has quite a few years of experience now running a data hub. I believe you're currently redesigning the hub to develop it further. So I guess you have some specific experiences both with regard to how data management models have changed and also how the role of the customer has changed in that.
Yeah, I have a slide. I don't know if you could put it on. But that's right. The Danish Data Hub have been in operation for 4 years now. And it is a central market facilitator for the Danish market. Last year we put a second version in operation supporting the supplier-centric model. And maybe actually it should be named more consumer-centric because it is actually putting the consumer in the middle. Besides being a central data register, it also holds central market facilitating processes such as move in, move out, and shift of supply, etc. If you look at the picture there, you can see the different roles using the data hub, starting with the consumer, having the smart meter or the meter at the home. The DSO is responsible for collecting the data and securing the data quality and then sending in the meter data to the data hub along with the tariffs, subscriptions and fees. Energinet as the TSO is also providing tariffs to the data hub and then the system is delivering these data and calculations to the electricity suppliers. And the electricity supplier is then the only party fronting the customer. So the electricity supplier is the one that you have a connection with, is the one sending the bill, collecting the money, etc. And when you have such a data set, it also becomes interesting for other parties to use it. So we build in a third-party access where you as a consumer can grant access in a controlled manner to your own data to third parties. We didn't foresee that it would be such an important part of the system. So it is very crucial to have this functionality well working. So we are now working on a second version on that specific part of the system. Along with that, we also have an access where the consumer directly can access their own data, like the Est-feed, not as fine as you, but it's the same concept. So the consumer have my data access. So that's the Danish data hub, and after 4 years of operation, we really see that it have changed the market behavior and have. We are seeing development in the market parties, new parties arriving and trying to be innovative on top of this. So we see it as a working concept.
Great. Then finally over to Roberto, who represents the DSOs on this panel. Your thoughts on data management?
Yeah, well, first of all, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Roberto Zangrandi. I do represent EDSO, which is the European Association gathering 31 among the largest distribution system operators. And it makes me a little bit smile when we consider data hubs and single case homogenization platforms, since we do represent some 180 million metering point with my association, so the level of difficulty could be juggernaut if you want to address it all in one and all immediately. So this said, I liked very much your slide and the role of the DSO that you have so graciously emphasized in your slide. We we do have, as DSOs, a big responsibility when it comes to data. And this is why EDSO is actively thinking of design a framework for its members and for the DSOs in general to correctly approach the data management and all what will come in terms of discussions. First of all, with the TSOs and with the other market actors as far as data are concerned. So we are working on a framework that starts from embedding per default cybersecurity, privacy, and data protection factor, which already opens an array of difficulties in terms of discussion, which is going to be very, very dense. On top of this, we would like all our members to commit on a specific availability of data when it brings a value that everyone would enjoy available and easily accessible data while protecting operators' assets. Because the face of electricity towards the consumer, it's mainly us, the DSO. And being the face of electricity before the consumer gives us an added responsibility in terms of maintenance and continuous investment in our asset that must be also defended. The data we would like to offer the public must be homogeneous and reusable. It means that everyone would use data regardless of their format. This is very important, and this is, first of all, a big advantage for the DSOs themselves, for the TSOs, and for the market operators. Interoperability with application providers, and this is a de facto that must be also presented to the whole market system. And interoperability is the big commitment. Laurent Schmitt mentioned it before this morning during his intervention. I share the view, and I believe that DSOs and TSO have an enhanced responsibility in keeping the process open and transparent in terms of cooperation. We shall have inevitably platforms that will be various and relying on some possibly different technological aspect, like the stock exchange trading platforms that anyway do interact one with another. So I was joking over lunch with Froke here, and I was telling her we shall end up in needing a Trivago of the platforms in order to grant the interoperability of the system. Last but not least, we believe that the interactive system must be not just ready, but designed to be able to handle connected devices and connected appliances. This is a given. But most of all, I would like to remember the first pillar. It will be cybersecurity, privacy, and certainly the enhanced protection of the whole system, first of all, of the consumer. So this is our starting point when we tackle the overall data topic.
Good. I think I'd like to go a little bit into more detail on this TSO-DSO cooperation discussion, because if you read the Clean Energy Package and lots of other policy documents that have been produced in the last years, I think the expectation that you're going to use all this flexibility in the distribution grid for purposes also in the transmission grid is one issue. You have all these questions related to system planning, for instance, whether it's efficient to reinforce the transmission network or the distribution network, how you see these things in connection. It's about congestion management and everything. What are the requirements for data management in that regard, and how do you see the role of data hubs and other possible tools? I don't know who would want to start with that. Thomas, perhaps, who has 50% of his reserves in the distribution grid. Did I understand that correctly?
Actually, I think you said a lot in your question already. So, what to say more? To say in the clean energy package, in the proposition, there are some provisions in order to move forward about those questions. We know that it is one thing to set principles in a big legislation or regulation, but it is another thing to develop network codes and to develop concrete, practical market rules in which we need to address the issues of interoperability. Of course, this is extremely technical, but that needs to be done. We will need also to address other issues like coordination between different kind of uses for flexibilities. Let's say today flexibility can be used to provide services to the whole system, like helping maintaining the frequency, ancillary services, balancing. This is one possible use. The same flexibility can provide services to manage congestions to the transmission grid, and the same flexibility can also be used, if it is well located, to provide services to the distribution grids. I think it has been said by previous speakers, if us grid operators are well regulated, there should be no issue to use flexibilities instead sometimes of grid, and this is one regulation question about regulation. But also there is a question about coordination between those different kind of uses. Sometimes we can have very long debates about how we will coordinate. But for the moment, I'm not so sure there are so many cases in which there is a huge problem of coordination. We'll see what's going to happen, but that brings me back to the question of when we are discussing about data management or data hubs, sometimes we consider it as an end, but it is a tool.
Yeah.
There will be different arrangements for different purposes. It is one thing to provide real-time data for market parties, maybe for consumers, but maybe for not every consumer. Not everybody requires the same access to data. This is something very different to provide statistical information. It does not require real time. And it is even something else to address coordination issues. That leads to question about, should we have one single platform for flexibility? Should we have different market arrangements? And then market participants can shop between the different ones. And of course, if the market arrangements have been well designed, they will find and select the one which brings the most value, and they will not double sell the same flexibility. But you see that there are at least 3 different kinds of questions behind.
Yeah. Yes, Frauke?
Yeah, if I may build on that, but to start off, during the break I had a conversation with someone saying, and it's not the first time I heard this, well, on TSO, DSO cooperation, all very nice, but when it comes down to it, we hear from many DSOs, so we feel they're not really interested in it. And I think what this points to is a regulatory challenge more than anything else, in that many DSOs, and not all of them, but many DSOs in Europe today are, in a way, stopped by a regulatory framework that allows them to focus into CapEx investments only, instead of taking a holistic TOTEX approach and taking a smart approach to the system and understanding what's going on there. So first thing I think is to adjust the regulatory incentives there and enable the DNOs to also become somewhat a DSO in terms of understanding what's going on and taking an interest in what's going on. But then how can things look in practice? From a flexibility providers' perspective, the biggest nightmare in terms of the coordination, and Thomas, you mentioned today there aren't too many coordination issues, that's right. But the biggest nightmare would be if we see situations where, for example, as a flexibility provider, I have sold a balancing service to the TSO, and then we have a local congestion problem and the DSO curtails me and I cannot live up on my commitment. That mustn't happen, and you can hardly hold, for example, an aggregator responsible for not delivering in such cases. So we need to find ways to work around that. And I think that brings us back to this market-based approach that I was happy to hear actually from many of you, saying we should have a platform. It can be one platform, it can be different ways, but basically where both TSOs and DSOs and market actors can acquire flexibility. And whether that is one platform or not is not the core question. The core question is it streamlined, and is it possible, are the products standardized, are they well, interoperable in a way that market providers can opt where to offer in terms of durations and everything else. So standardization is very important there. But then essentially, if I come back to my nightmare example of having committed to one system operator, well, if I've already committed to the DSO that I will be available to provide local flexibility when there's a congestion problem, then obviously it would be my responsibility to not at the same time commit something to the TSO so I cannot deliver. And I've got the problem solved. And I think this is another reason why we need to look into this integrated approach, because otherwise we will probably not be able to solve this communication challenge of who gets access to the flexibility in the first place.
And Roberto, you have...
Yes, in terms of the integrated approach, there is maybe a splitting of the problem necessary. One is the real technical cooperation between DSOs and TSOs that is tackled via a common platform that has delivered result in the past couple of years, which is currently discussing open topics on active and reactive power management. It's very much in the direction of flexibility, which will recast the data management issue. So that is open, and we are progressing very, very well and very much between DSOs and TSOs in this respect. Certainly, when I said that you can split the problem, is that there is necessarily something that is strongly orientated in reaching a set of rules or network codes that can accommodate the features of a TSO and a DSO abiding to the new rules of the market. But we certainly must accommodate the market operators in that. The point is a transparent vision of this. Here we have got a legislation which is in progress, speculative imagination on the shape, the format, and the needs, and the deliverable of the future market that we still are imagining with little example that per se do not constitute a reference in terms of business cases yet. And this is what Manuel Sanchez said in the previous panel. We need testing, testing, and testing. So I believe that the DSOs are ready to accommodate the testing, testing, and testing, piloting, piloting, and piloting. I believe that the TSOs also could be subject that are going to be involved in this process. Bear in mind, and it can appear very cheap what I'm going to say, but bear in mind that a great burden of the responsibility of integrating the resources of the new market rests on the shoulder of the DSOs and of the TSOs. the DSOs will be very much involved, not just in the distribution of energy, but also in the collection of the energy that is coming from, let's say, the bottom of the grid. We already incorporate what is 95 by consensus percent of the renewable generated, but we are very much on route to collect the 100% of the prosumer production, with all those problems that such a statement brings along. So I could just liquidate the topic with a very easy no DSO, no party. But it is a real and substantial issue for us in terms of DSO, in terms of integration with the existing grids and the TSOs and the aggregators as a figure that will emerge on the market. And certainly the prosumer will have another time the need to recognize a face as a sparring partner in the process of its participation, of his or her participation into the energy transition. So let's not lose this framework, please. And then with Frauke, we are actively thinking of really ways to preserve the role of the aggregator with the evolving role of the DSOs.
And just to follow up on that discussion, or do you have a short comment to that, Frauke?
Yeah, just a short comment when it comes to the face and who interacts with the consumer. And I'm not sure entirely what you meant exactly with that, but I assume that basically we need the consumer to be able to offer to the TSO and the DSO, but in most cases he will not be able to do that on his own. And we might even run into trouble if he did it on his own. Well, for large consumers, that's a different story. But if we have household consumers taking direct contracts or being directly approached by TSOs or DSOs to offer their flexibility, it's very hard to imagine that this flexibility would be allocated optimally between being offered to the TSO, the DSO, or the market party. So essentially, what we see is a market-based approach, where there is whichever market arrangement where TSOs, DSOs, and market parties source their flexibility, and this will be served by market parties and not by bilateral contracts. Because this brings us very much into the discussion about who owns the flexibility and who runs it. And clearly for an efficient system approach, it cannot be the regulated actor itself owning and running the flexibility, and surely not in the consumer's home running the flexibility, because we would lock ourselves into providing the service only to one system operator, to one user of flexibility, while we need for the flexibility to be free to be used for all users.
Good. I have a follow-up question. I think it's mainly for Elering and Energinet, who have operational experience of data hubs. And that relates to this discussion about aggregators, third parties, the need to get these markets to sort of interact so that you make sure that the flexibility is sold in the right market at the right time. When you have opened up for third-party access to data and third-party applications and so on, have you either thought about how you can facilitate the development of those types of flexibility services across platforms and different grid levels, different markets, etc.? Or do you see any third parties who come forward with good ideas and good solutions? Anders?
Yeah, well, it have not been part of the first version of our development, but as it's said, it's very much needed now. There's an amount of distributed production that calls for aggregations or somehow controlling it. So we are looking into this different kinds of aggregations models, and you could start by having a small scale third-party access, and then just use the information, and then the further development could be having a market for it. we are not there yet, but that is what we are looking for. For the other thing about the DSO, TSO, I think as it is today, the Data Hub is the central market facilitator, and neither the DSO or the TSO can operate our business alone. We need this close cooperation. And we need, I think that's why we need to set up these forums where we can discuss the development and the issues.
Kaja, do you have any?
Well, Ellering has signed a contract with a local aggregator to put up a pilot. So as the logic goes, first the pilot testing, and then real services could be provided. And also, I know we have a development project together with our main DSO, Elektrilevi, for providing this flexibility platform. But what seems is definitely real-time data would be needed. Also, data exchange across borders would definitely benefit. But these again, at the moment, have barriers. So in all these, actually with the Baltic states, we already have some quite well collaborations on data exchange and data hubs. But as explained initially, the first pilots testing, and then we'll see whether these services and how they could be provided in Estonia.
I think that's interesting. Do you think this will solve your problem, Frauke, or at least move in the right direction?
Certainly it goes in the right direction, and in some places, in some fields, we do need pilots to move forward. But I think for a very large range of solutions, we are beyond the phase of pilots now. And when we look at the provision of system services, if you look at the countries that opened their markets, look at the UK market where certain flexibility products have been opened for a while, the French market, the Belgian market, where both products have been opened and also market players, including third-party aggregators, independent aggregators who are not integrated with the same customer's supplier, have access to the market. And it's been working. I mean, Thomas has been quoting the numbers to start us off on fast frequency response and on manual restoration. The numbers are impressive. And I think this shows we are beyond the phase of pilots when it comes to many things. What we need is a consequent opening of the markets for all solutions and players. Having markets in the first place, in some most extreme cases, we still have system operators contracting directly, for example, with the country's largest generator to get a service delivered instead of contracting it in a market-based approach. So this we need to have a consequent opening of. And product definitions that work for all the different players. Sometimes we still see prohibitive minimum bid sizes that have no technical justification, but that have just evolved in the past when there weren't any smaller actors on the market. So these are things that need to be adjusted, and these are things that we can do today because we know what they are. And then, yeah, to mention it again, a framework also for all market players, including non-integrated parties, including independent parties such as independent aggregators, to enter the market. These are the issues we can tackle. When it comes to certain other things, services that haven't been tested before, yes, by all means, let's move forward with the pilots, but let's not pilot until the end of days. Let's also implement what we know can be implemented, and we know it for a large part.
Thomas?
Yeah, just wanted first to react to your previous comment, but I'm going to react to both, to say just that I agree that we need aggregators, and everybody understands it for residential participation. Of course, my grandmother is not going to sell anything to the TSO or the TSO or anybody else by herself, but it is true also for the industry more and more. We used to have a market in which big industrial consumers were bidding directly, and more they delegate this responsibility to a third-party aggregator just because the aggregator does at the same time the balancings in services, market participation. So even for consumers that have the experience and the knowledge of markets, we see, at least in our country, we see a move towards the use of third-party aggregators. Some of them are independent, some of them are linked to a supplier, but there is somebody else in between. Yeah.
Yeah. Small follow-up question also for Roberto here, because we are talking a lot now about the TSO as market facilitator using data hubs. You talked about, I think you mentioned something about the DSOs having started some work on a kind of, not necessarily standard model, but some common principles of data management and maybe a common model, I don't know. How do you see the DSOs as possible market facilitators and data management needs in that regard?
Well, we certainly need to continue these strong bilateral and as transparent as possible, even more transparent than now, which is not obscure, not hinting at this, but we must be really much more on a exchange of potential difficulties and potential opportunities. Certainly, we want to stay neutral on the market. This is our mission. Never forget that the DSO runs a public service of social interest. So, and this is the core of the market neutrality it must safeguard as a corporation or as an institution. But certainly, we must integrate in this transparent way to tackle the evolution of the reciprocal grids, the other market parties, and a bit strong, initially maybe not just agree, but also address the evolution of the market parties. Because TSOs and ourselves do enjoy technological constraints. These technological constraints are to be examined, researched, developed with the industry and the manufacturers and the supplier of our industry. But the new market leaders must, the new market operators must flow in, evolve the general availability of services and applications, but may I say please? Well, please, let's avoid a kind of regulatory anarchy that such a rapid and uncontrolled evolution might bring. We already have got a regulatory landscape which is scattered around almost 3 times 10 different national regulatory authorities. We have got different layers of interaction with the regulatory bodies and the regulatory provisions that are active in every land. We are talking about integration. The first point of the integration is not to avoid an excess of regulation or regulation per se, is to avoid the anarchy that can cause regulatory jam in some countries. That would be the real obstacle to interoperability and to cross-border use of the flexibility that a digitalized grid and a digitalized world based on smart grid may offer. So this is my 4 minutes and 23 to go, maybe my conclusion.
Yeah, the clock has started ticking down here, but I'd like to, before I round off, maybe ask Kaja a couple of more specific questions on Elering. and the SFeed. The first is a very fact-based question which came from the audience on when did you first get the idea to SFeed and how long did it take to implement?
Good question. Well, SFeed, it started, most probably the ideas were there even before, but it started with a Norwegian grant, and Green ICT grant in, I think, 2014. And then there were a lot of partners. Not only Elering was a partner there, but there were Elektrilevi and also some district heating companies involved, and maybe some smaller as well. So it started with this grant, then it was some concepts were developed during this project, and last year in 2016, an agreement with R&D project with a local software developer was signed. So then started the development of the platform and the concept of the platform and the ideas around the platform. So if I calculate it right now, then it's some 3 years, 4 years.
Which I think is quite funny that you mentioned the Norwegian grant, because I know the Norwegian Data Hub quite well, coming from Norway and having consulted on that initially. I think we are looking at least 7 years from the task being given to the TSO to develop the hub before it's operational. It's not operational yet, so you're quite quick. And the final question really is, I think it's a bit outside the sector, but we have talked a lot about TSOs and DSOs and new entrants, but I would be interested in hearing a little bit about how you think about application development and system development and the interaction with the IT sector in more general, because what you're doing here sounds to me like what Google, Apple, and other IT giants are doing.
So in looking at it on a very broad level, for me it's very interesting to see how the old conservative sector like energy has started to take up the innovations, the technologies developed in ICT. So it's a great example of how the new technologies from this paradigm, the ICT paradigm, how they have been implemented in old conservative sectors like energy. So, and of course, the application developers, they are much smarter, much more intelligent, talented to come up with great applications that might use our data hub data, but they might also come up with other data that they would need. So SFeed in that sense is a great platform that can link all these different data hubs that are interesting for the application. And of course, the application developers, they think of the consumer. So this is the link with the consumer and the data hubs, application, and in the end consumer who really benefits from the services and the opening of the market and that new services are provided on the market.
Yeah, good. So you're not just an energy market facilitator, but also an IT market facilitator now.
Can be seen like this as well, yes.
I'm afraid we're running out of time, or do we have some more minutes? No, but could maybe just give everyone a minute or two to give their final comments on these issues that we have discussed. Because I think in summary from my side, it's clear that we are I mean, there's lots of things happening now from a regulatory and technical and market perspective, and I guess it's important still to remember, as I think Roberto also mentioned, that this is about infrastructure and social services, or whatever we want to call them, and it's important that the grid keeps functioning while we're doing all these new innovative things also. But I think the potential is here with the right degree of data management and customer empowerment that we should be able to, in 10 or 20 years' time or whatever, see a completely different system from what we have now, which is much more efficient and customer-friendly. So maybe just by rounding off, that each of you could give a minute or two on how you see the what would be the good solution in 10 years' time or whatever for data management and customer empowerment. You can start with Frauke, for instance.
Okay. Well, as you say, actually, digitalization is making a lot of things possible, and we could see a very smart system 10 years from now if we manage to have an integrated approach with the right market signals, reaching people, reaching market actors. I think eventually both consumers, people, as well as businesses will make use of the solutions that digitalization offers them. They will use this flexibility. And if they can use it, if they can valorize it towards a market that works, towards whoever it is that buys their services at any moment, they will go for that. If, on the other hand, they get the signal that they're not really used, their flexibility isn't really wanted, they get very rigid signals, they will probably go the other way, and they will probably say, okay, I have this great flexibility, I'll combine it with my local generation and go into autarky. I go off-grid more and more. And I think it's basically, it all depends on the signals that people get, and it's not that one is worse than the other. Possibly from a macroeconomic perspective it is, but it's about the question of what signals people are getting. And from a system operator's perspective, I guess it's pretty clear what might be more interesting and more efficient in the long run.
Thomas, some final comments from you?
Yeah, I agree with what has been said so far. And just to give you maybe one last figure, by integrating flexibility and reaching the levels that have been I've discussed at the beginning of the speech, we managed to reduce our procurement cost by almost 30%. So flexibility, if we manage to find the right way to integrate it in our power system, it can means money and value for everybody. Of course, now we should move one step forward. We should try to find some way to ensure system security through coordination when we will have, because one day eventually we will have some issues about coordination between the uses of flexibility. Ensuring optimal allocation is not only something kind of dream of engineer, it is also a way to ensure that the development of this flexibility is going to be publicly supported, and there will be no problem like somebody, as Frauke said, who sells flexibility to somebody, and then there is a curtailment, and it is impossible for it to bring the service. So we should, in our thinking, we should work on those issues, but still what is important to us is the recognition that there is some room for economic flexibility. It's not just kind of buzzword in order just to participate to nice panels. It is also some money.
Great. Anders?
Yeah, well, having this central data hub now, the next step will be to set data free and to do it in a controlled manner with robust system, because when you are setting data free and they are used in new systems and new applications, it is becoming crucial that they are available and the data quality is right. So I think that's the next steps to work on. That is to have robust platforms and high data quality in all chains in the value chain.
So when you started coordinating this panel a few days back, you proposed an area that we didn't tackle in this discussion, which might be a good chute de phrase, as the French say, a conclusion for this. And your question was novel IT application using data. So we have got many. I wouldn't elaborate on this, but you had to put here two different questions. So what kind of data would be especially useful? So from a DSO point of view, I would say that those we currently rely upon are a good basis, together with the data of the TSOs. But certainly, we need a brand new set of data interaction that is coming from the Internet of Energy, or from the Internet of Things, and the collection and the delivery of this data will be another part of an opening market for some provider, or something that is belonging to some extent to the TSOs and the DSOs for their use, enhancement, and let's say appropriate increase of value of the data itself, functional to the whole system. And then you said a specific example of application. I don't know. Appliances, electric vehicle are there, but certainly there are IT experts that talk about clusterized analysis and active use of consumer installation. So with all the fantasy that this brings along. So I would conclude that this is a fantasy is the limit. Thank you.
Great. A short final comment from you, Kaja?
So at this stage, we can pretty much say that the minimum platform of the SVID is ready. Of course, there is still a lot of work to be done, and our future, or even some of them are very near future, things that we need to do, are related with how to make the integration process of the applications and also the data hubs with the platform as easy as possible, because there is no point of the platform if it isn't easily accessible. So this is definitely one very huge or important thing that we have to deliver. Then to have as many interesting data hubs integrated with the platform, again, gives value to the applications, and then the application developers can build interesting applications for the customer. So a lot more data hubs, a lot more information connected with the platform and applications is another key that we have to follow. Then third thing is real-time data. So at the moment is hour-based data, but real-time data would definitely be very interesting for those devices that switch on and off the devices, for example, according to the market electricity price. Then also data exchange across borders is something to develop further. So these things that I mentioned, they can be possible if there is business incentives, and but business incentives can come from regulative environment. So definitely, I very much liked a comment or a resolution that came from the first panel today. I don't remember anymore who came up with it, but it was that we need innovation in regulation. And that is definitely one key. How it's going to be done, I'm probably not the expert, but definitely this is something that could enable all this much better that we discussed here today. So yes, that would be all from my side. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Then thank you very much to you too. So that's about it for this panel.